Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the 6th round of the X2O Trophy which took place in Hamme. With me here to discuss not most of the entertaining races, but still two races is Issam.
Yes, thank you for having me.
We'll start by talking about the men's race, and to be honest it was not a surprise that race was fairly boring. We knew going into this race that Wout van Aert was the big favourite as Mathieu van der Poel is racing tomorrow. And he delivered, he did what he was supposed to do. He had the best start, took it relatively easy in the first lap. We still had 8 leaders in the second lap, but on a attack on the road that we didn't really see because the camera cut to a crash of Lars van der Haar in the background, he dropped the rest of the leaders from his wheel. From there on, he could freewheel towards victory. He was 20 seconds faster in that lap and extended his gap until it was a minute, and then he really just went on the cruise control and was able to take victory. Behind that, there was a much more interesting battle for the second place in the race. We had the Pauwels Sauze duo of Vanthourenhout and Iserbyt, but there was a young lion fighting against them, and that was Pim Ronhaar. Ronhaar, who skipped last week's racing in both Zonnebeke as Benidorm, came back and was fresh. He was fighting with them, and with 3 laps to go, he put in a pretty big attack, but that was a rookie error. He paid the price for that in cash right on the spot as Iserbyt attacked the next lap and was gone. Vanthourenhout also attacked from his back in the final lap and also dropped Ronhaar, which meant that Vanthourenhout needed to settle for third despite coming fairly close to second, but that place was reserved for Eli Iserbyt. Yeah, Issam, what can we do except just once again praise Wout van Aert? It's a class ride. To be so much better than the rest is just a showing of his talent, but at this point it's hardly surprising anymore. He does it week after week, and in the absence of Pidcock and the absence of Van der Poel, I would almost say that he did his duty to take the win here, but of course we still need to acknowledge the fact that it's special, the type of performances he and the others are able to put in and week out.
Yeah, indeed, he seems to have no drop-off whatsoever, and today was from Van Aert a very, very strong ride, and that is what he needs, because the Worlds are coming up, so for him it was very important that today he was going to leave the race with a very good feeling, to not crash or have any difficulties or hamper something that might be hampering you in the coming week. That didn't happen, and then for him it was a case to win the race without any difficulties, and he just did that, and it looked very strong from Van Aert. It was a very good effort. I think the only mistake that was made was probably more with the mechanics, the fact the bike changes were not always that smooth, and other than that, I think that for Van Aert he is 100% ready to go to the World Championships and see what he can do there.
I don't want this to turn into a World Championships preview podcast because we have a long preview podcast coming up this week, also some interviews hopefully still, but it's just that this further confirms what we already know. Van Aert and Van der Poel, it's looking to be a battle between those two, and the rest need something extraordinary to compete with them. And Iserbyt and Vanthourenhout, they do their best, but it's as if it's a drag race between a Ferrari and a Renault Twingo. The raw watts that Van Aert can put out, like we saw today, it's just something else. It's not only in cross, also on road, one of the best of the world in doing that. So Van Aert was just the best, and we need to sometimes praise the talent that he has because it seems so normal that he does this, but it is not normal that he's able to do this every week. And at the same time, we should also conclude that Iserbyt and Vanthourenhout both put in strong rides. I do think that we can question the tactics of Pim Ronhaar. I think he got very excited and went all out to try and drop the Pauwels Sauze duo way too early in the race, especially with his teammate Lars van der Haar coming from behind. But Iserbyt, after what was a disappointment at the Belgian Championships, looks to have repacked himself, also already seen in Benidorm, and Vanthourenhout, who was sick, also looks to have recovered properly because it was a good race by both of them.
Yeah, indeed. I think, for Ronhaar, I can remember well the stories that went around before the start of the season, and then it was I think maybe a lot of pressure that was put on him, and a lot was expected. In the end, you can conclude the season is not over yet, but it's very close by the end, and you can definitely conclude that he didn't really match those things that have been said and that were predicted for him at the start of the season. And I think that when you have such a day and you have a very good day, you have good legs, and you come in such a situation and you're not really used to that, then you think that is probably the best way to do it. I mean, it's very difficult for an athlete to, when you're not racing for so many times for a podium, to then only get one chance basically this season. Maybe you will get another one, but with the elites to have one chance, and then you will do almost everything wrong, or you might be lucky and do everything right. And today it was just, he tried something. Iserbyt and Vanthourenhout were very happy that he did just that, and they played it out very well. And I think for Iserbyt and Vanthourenhout, especially for Vanthourenhout, is probably great for him that he has a podium, because he was sick in Benidorm. There were some talks that he wasn't feeling well, but I think today he showed that he's in good form and ready to go all out next week.
Yeah, Iserbyt and Vanthourenhout both look to be fine, and realistically third is the best they can achieve at the Worlds, assuming that Van Aert and Van der Poel have a normal race. But about Ronhaar, okay, if we look at the expectations set at the beginning of the season, where it was said that he would, in the early phases of the season, fight for podiums with Iserbyt and Vanthourenhout, okay, he didn't do that, and I think that was always an insanely high goal to set and unrealistic from such a young guy. Don't forget, he is actually a final year under 23. But if you look over his season, it's not been that bad. I mean, in the beginning of the season, it was a lot of top fives, in and around the top five, even in some of the World Cups. Then, okay, there are some bad races. 19th in Fayetteville, 20th in Beekse Bergen. I recall a DNF in Hulst, he had some back issues, but it's not all been so bad. I mean, 8th in Dublin, 7th in Val di Sol, he had some back issues, as said, needed to skip some races around Antwerp. His Christmas period with a 6th place in Herentals, 8th in Kokzijde, those are also not bad results. So, just like with Thibaut Nys, who had a DNF today, it's been a bit up and down, mainly determined by the state of their back. But it's not a bad season for Ronhaar, and if he is able to set another step, he will be able to fight for podiums and potentially even victories in a year or 2 or 3. We shouldn't expect these young guys to do everything immediately, and okay, I agree. Sven Nys in giving these interviews helped create a narrative where this season might be viewed upon as disappointing, but I don't think we should necessarily focus and determine the success of his season upon that interview, because if you're able to present these results as a young rider where you finish in the top 10 of races for more than 75% of the time, I think you're having a very good season as an under 23 or first year elite. Because if you look at a rider like Ryan Kamp, who is a year older, or Mace Hendricks, who is a year older, both have had way tougher seasons than Pim Ronhaar.
No, absolutely. And, like you said, when you are still around that age, it's very difficult to have a very consistent season. And I think, like you said, for Ronhaar, this season definitely hasn't been bad. If you compare it to what has been said before the season, then definitely he didn't deliver to those predictions. But I think that if you look at it from just his progress, I think that he definitely made some serious progress, he and Nys as well. I think that he's, definitely somebody that give him 1 or 2 more years, and then he will definitely show himself more around for and have more fights for podiums. And when you are going to be fighting more for those podiums, I think he will take such a battle like this a little bit different and maybe wait for Van der Haar, who was definitely closing in, but because of actually the efforts of Ronhaar, Van der Haar was kind of hanging, and then at a certain point you kind of snap, and for Van der Haar it was then impossible to bridge that gap, and for him maximum was 5th.
Yeah, it really wasn't the smartest race by Ronhaar. He had two hyenas in his wheel, Iserbyt and Vanthourenhout. They were just waiting for Ronhaar to tire himself, and that was already way too early to attack in the first place. But second of all, with Van der Haar closing in and coming as close as 7 seconds, he really should have waited. We know from the Belgian broadcast that Sven Nys shouted to Ronhaar that he should sit in the wheels, but I don't know if he heard that or just decided to ignore it, and if he ignored it, how much can you blame such a young guy? As you say, this is the chance of his season, to get an elite podium. We know he can do it. He did it in Besançon last year, but it was the chance for him. And ultimately he came short. He got too excited, but he will learn from it. He will learn from himself, and there's a proper staff around him at Baloise Trek who will tell him, well, you should look behind you sometimes, or on these sections where you cross each other, glance on the other side, see who's coming behind you, create awareness in the race, have an idea for what position am I fighting, how many laps are there to go, who is coming behind me, hey, this is a teammate. You might not need to pull team tactics, as in letting the gap full, but you can sit in the wheel, especially if you are with two of the Paul Sousa guys who are known to be pulling team tactics with the two of them. So I think that was a bit unfortunate for Van der Haar, but ultimately after that crash that was simply too much for him. We can't fully blame Ronhaar for Van der Haar ending 5th, because we know that he's been struggling with form ever since the Christmas period. He said he went very deep there, then got sick, then had the nationals, and just everything together meant that he couldn't recover. They still did some hard training though, because he wants to be good at Worlds next weekend, and who knows, it's tough now because who is where in their preparation, who prepares in what way, which rider thinks it's important to bag confidence this week, and which rider/team thinks, well, it's all about next week, going to use this as a final block in a heavy training block, the final day of that, and then rest towards Worlds. We don't know. Ultimately, we'll see next week, but for Van der Haar, things aren't looking as good as they looked a couple of weeks ago, although, to be honest, basically ever since that Christmas period started, he looked to be lacking just 1%, and today was just a further continuation of that.
Yeah, indeed. I think, for Van der Haar, it's going to be the question if he's going to be in form in time at the Worlds. He said it himself, and he's not very happy with the form, how it is right now, but maybe with the compensation of the hard training that he did, plus some rest next week, that might bring him somewhere in the championship. He's somebody that likes the championships. He can always find something extra, but the legs will speak in the end. So it will be very difficult for Van der Haar to get that 3rd spot on the podium, considering the fact that Van der Poel and Van Aert will have no issues and will battle it out at the front. But it's going to be very interesting what Van der Haar can bring next week, and I don't know if he's starting actually in Besançon.
No, he's not starting Besançon, and I think it's a question if you want to do such a heavy weekend with Hamme and Besançon, and then especially the travel between them. It's a 7-hour drive. It's definitely not ideal the week before Worlds. There are some riders that are doing it. We know that Iserbyt is doing it, Pim Ronhaar is doing it, Michael Vanthourenhout is doing it. On the other hand, you have riders like Van Aert and Van der Poel saying, no, we're going for one trip, we're not going to go for a long travel, so only one race in the weekend for them. And I think it's kind of nice on one hand that they don't race against each other this weekend, because on one hand it leaves us a bit in the dark and a bit in the mist, how good are they going to be next week? On the other hand, it's a bit of a shame because it could have built even more momentum if we had another great battle this weekend, but yeah, it is what it is, and Van der Haar, as you say, he needs to hope for the best. We can look at the entire top 10. Van Aert took the win ahead of Iserbyt, Vanthourenhout, Ronhaar and Van der Haar. 6th place went to Cameron Mason ahead of Vincent Bastaans. Lander Looks was 8th, with Arne Vrachte in 9th and Jentel Beckaert in 10th. Some names in the top 10 that we haven't spoken about this season at all. Jentel Beckaert, for instance, I think he is on the edge of not getting another contract at Bauha's Trek. Arne Vrachte races for the Akor Tormans team, which is now the youth team of the Quickstep Soudal Road team. So don't get confused, they are not affiliated with Wanty, they are affiliated with Quickstep on the road. I don't know what's up there. Maybe he can put himself on the radar of the actual Tormans cross team, but I doubt it. The start field today was pretty weak. I think there's one rider we still need to mention, and that is Cameron Mason, who is back racing. He raced Hamme and then Worlds next week. I think he's choosing a very wise program, not making it too stacked and choosing for a better approach, which allows him to train a lot. He also didn't do Benidorm, but he was in Spain. So I think his schedule really allows him to be at his best next week at Worlds, and who knows what he can do there, because it wasn't too bad today, despite a pretty bad start.
Yeah, indeed. I really hope that he can have a race without any difficulties next week, and I think that today kind of confirms that he is in a very good form, and considering that there might be some compensation coming up, I think that I really want to see how this way of approaching the Worlds, how it will play out for him, and it will be interesting if that will bring him a very good result.
On to the women's race then, and that was basically an early version of the men's race, at least in terms of what happened at the front of the race. The teammate of Wout van Aert, Fem van Empel, had the best start, and she was also opening a gap pretty quickly, probably even faster than Wout van Aert, as she already had a gap at the end of the first lap. She had 10 seconds, and because Shrin van Anrooij had a pretty bad start, Van Anrooij needed time to really start chasing Van Empel. By then, Van Empel already had 15 seconds on Van Anrooij, and from there on there was really no starting the chase anymore for Van Anrooij. She did what she could, but Van Empel was simply way too strong and took the win ahead of Van Anrooij. Behind that, there was an interesting battle for third. For a while, Brandt was riding there together with Betsma, but Alvarado came back pretty strong from a crash in the early phases of the race. She passed Betsma and passed Brandt, went into third and kept on to third. That was still somewhat important for the classification, as it looks to be a battle between Brandt and Alvarado there. In the end, Brandt managed to limit the damage to 15 seconds, but as she took 5 bonification seconds earlier in the race, she only lost 10 seconds on Alvarado. But Alvarado ended third on the podium today. Van Empel took the win here. Issam, another win for Jumbo. 1-2. Nah, not 1-2. 1-1, basically. 2 wins here today in Hamme. Successful day for them, and Van Empel looked very good, and yeah, like really good. It looked like the Van Empel we saw in the early phases of the season again.
Yeah, this was a very, very, very good Van Empel, I think, because there was not a single moment that you saw that she really had to dig deep to make that pace work out, and was never in any difficulties whatsoever. It really looked strong. And that was a Van Empel that we haven't seen in a while. We have seen a Van Empel that has been going well, but I think the Van Empel of today indeed reminds me a little bit of that Van Empel that was at the start of the season, and I think there's not a better moment to have that form than now. Maybe a week too early, but that is definitely going to be interesting how that will play out for her next week. And I think for today, with the starting field that was today, knowing that Pietersen was not going to be here, we kind of knew that Van Empel was going to be the main favorite for today's race, but you then also have to, you have to deliver, and I think she just did that, and, was a very good race from Van Empel.
Yeah, it was a good race, and although I do think last week in Benidorm she also looked good, there are some important things to note, and one of them is why the gap with Van Anrooij was so big. First of all, some things on the course that I noticed. There was this hill with some Belgian stairs in it, and Van Empel was able to hop them. Van Anrooij needed to run them every lap. I think that cost her like 5-6 seconds every lap, and that's pretty significant. And it's honestly surprising that Van Anrooij wasn't able to hop them, because they really weren't that tough to hop, but apparently it was too tricky for her. And we know that Van Empel was able to bunny hop barriers, which for some reason she isn't doing anymore, which she did in the beginning of the season. But yeah, that cost her time. Another thing I noticed is that Van Anrooij, despite being a fast runner, lost some time on the barriers, and that's because she's a pretty early dismounter. This is not about seconds, but still, she dismounts her bike and then needs to take 4 or 5 steps before the first barrier. Normal riders only take 1 or 2 steps before the barriers. Normally 2, that's around the safe spot. So Van Anrooij is quite far above that. So those are 2 things I noticed on the course today, which didn't go too well for Van Anrooij. But more important is the training load that Van Anrooij did. Van Anrooij, after Benidorm, did not take rest. She cycled back from Benidorm to her hotel, 50 kilometers, so almost 2 hours of endurance after the race in Benidorm. And then she just continued training. 3 hours on Monday, 3 hours on Tuesday, then another ride of 4 hours somewhere. Then a coffee ride before flying back. On Friday, 2 hours on the cross bike. Still some heavy training. And that today, she said, I couldn't really dig deep. That's just a sign of tiredness. And it's not bad to have that. You come to the point, well, where are you in your season? Where are you in your preparation towards the World Championships? Van Anrooij decided to race the Under 23 race. We'll talk more thoroughly on that decision in the preview podcast. If you follow the podcast this season, you know both of us are not really a fan of that decision, but we'll keep that for the preview podcast and now talk about what happened here. That tiredness, it's not bad to have that because you can have time to rest. You have an entire week now before the racing in Hoogerheide kicks off. So it's not bad. It's just where are you in your schedule? Van Empel took rest after the race in Benidorm. She recovered from that, whilst Van Anrooij didn't take any time to recover. It's just building fatigue for her. Van Empel, she did do training, and those trainings confirmed that her form is very good. She put in a 5-minute personal best on one of the interval trainings she did this week. Did a long 5-hour endurance ride on Thursday still, but she did properly recover from that race in Benidorm, and that's something we didn't see Van Anrooij do. So the question is Van Empel able to hold this level towards Worlds? Does she decline a bit maybe? Or does she still gain a little bit? For Van Anrooij, I expect her to try and time the super compensation next week. The question is she fresh enough? Or does it not work out well for her? It's tough, but that's the type of racing you are in now. Everybody is somewhere else in their training plan towards Worlds, and that makes it incredibly tough to analyze the results.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also the reason why you shouldn't be, while it's a very good indication today and also tomorrow, you shouldn't be thinking too much of it. It will definitely, if for example your form was terrible in a way, then you could maybe have some conclusions already, and it can lead towards a bad performance also in next week. But on the other hand, it can also be that somebody ended their training, let's say on Thursday, and then they travel. And maybe, they were, like you said about Van Anrooij, after the race still training. So that means that you're not going to be 100% fresh at the start. There is it's going to be influencing a little bit your racing. So it's very difficult, a race like this, and it didn't help that Van Empel went away from the start. But the racing nevertheless was really good, and I think today somebody that had quite a good performance in my opinion was Alvarado.
Yeah, definitely. I'm not going to say that she could have beaten Van Empel or Van Anrooij. I mean, at some point everybody starts consolidating their gaps and they're like, well, why should I waste energy? But Alvarado definitely came back strong after that crash in the early phases of the race. She was at least the third strongest today. And, there's always a surprise at the World Championships. Normally, there's always a couple of favorites, and then there's somebody who all of a sudden managed to put themselves between them. And that could very well be Alvarado this year, because despite having it depends. Does she have a good season? I would say she does. I mean, she's pretty much been the fourth rider behind the likes of Van Anrooij, Pietersen, and Van Empel. She won some super prestige races, And that should make her the 4th in line at the World Championships. And when Van Anrooij falls away, she's 3rd. But I liked what I heard after the race interview. She believes in a world title. Like, in that interview, she was saying, I'm going to fight for it. You never know what happens. I trust myself. I know that I'm going to peak there. I know that I have the talent. I'm not racing for bronze. Everybody's talking about, but who's going to end 3rd behind Peters and Van Empel? But to even have a shot at beating them, you need to believe it. And the fact that Alvarado has that, I like that a lot. I think that's very powerful.
At the end of the day, the race it still has to be ridden, and can turn out to be a very a crazy day. And if you're not believing in it whatsoever, it might for some be better to not start at all. I mean, of course you have to believe in it, but not be unrealistic. And I think that's probably the right balance that she has at the moment. She knows that everything is possible, that her form at the moment looks quite good. And who knows, it can always be a surprise. But at the moment, if you look at how Van Empel was riding today, there is definitely still Van Empel is still a step above at the moment in terms of the level that she is reaching. But the racing, like I said, it has to be done, and the technical problems and difficulties can always come around in such a race. So we have to wait and see.
And I'm not ruling out Brandt either for that. I mean, Brandt today needed to go very deep, but also Brandt did a lot of training after Benidorm World Cup. She was also training with lots of riders from the track road team. So, I mean, I can see both Brandt and Alvarado come close. I mean, we know that both are able to go very deep on championships. So, who knows? For Betsema, I think things are a bit more difficult. It wasn't bad today, but the drop-off at the end of the race indicates to me that the form isn't quite there, and that's kind of been the case not necessarily the entire season, but definitely over the Christmas period. So
it is, and a bit of a shame, to be honest, that it had to go like that. I think that there is definitely a line that is moving upwards. It's getting a bit better now for Betsema, but I don't think that's the form that Betsema is currently in, that will improve in such an extent that she will be somebody that can do something on the Worlds. And also after that, the racing that is left for her, it's, you might be able to maybe fight for a victory left or right, but after the Worlds, in terms of classification, there's not much she can still do to get herself back into a winning position. So you can basically say that her season, despite the fact that it is not over, there is not much to gain from it anymore, apart from trying to, motivate yourself and get some good results. And I think that she can then probably after the season reflect on how it went and see if there are some areas where she can improve on.
Let's look at the entire top 10 then. I don't think there was all too much going on. It was not a deep field, most riders prioritizing tomorrow's race in Besançon. 6 Dutch riders in the first 6 positions. Van Empel ahead of Van Anrooij, Alvarado, Brandt, Betsema and Van Alphen. 7th place for Ribeiro, slightly disappointing, ahead of a Dutch duo. Molegraaf 8th, ahead of Bentveld in 9th. Nice to note that Laura Molegraaf made quite a bit of progression. It's nice to compare against Bentveld, since both raced against each other last year. Bentveld made progression, but last year she was pretty much the second junior the entire season, behind Backstedt of course, and she was pretty far ahead of Molegraaf. But eventually this season it looks to be that Molegraaf has made a bit more progression and is now able to finish ahead despite still only being a second year junior. So good progression for her, and also nice to see Francesca Baroni end in 10th. Good result by her as well. Then Issam, I think we've had it for Hamme. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you for having me. Next up, Besançon.
Yep, tomorrow we'll be discussing the World Cup in Besançon. Should be a good one, so see you guys then. Goodbye.